those of you who don't know me, Advocate Rose Colley. I'm currently the President of the Jersey Law Society, and I was asked at pretty short notice to chair the hustings this evening. But I'm really pleased to see so many of you present. There are certain rules that have been agreed by the candidates, but first of all I do need to say that Nigel Jones, who is one of the candidates, can't be with us this evening because he's tested positive for COVID. So we've got one candidate fewer this evening, but of course that means that you'll have more opportunity for questions because you'll have those extra minutes that you wouldn't otherwise have. Now, each candidate will give their opening statement, and they've agreed that they will have 3 minutes for that. And they've drawn lots, so we will start with number 1 and work down. And then I will open for questions, and I will try and take one person from this side, then one person from the other side, so it's as fair as it can be. And then candidate number 2 will be the first person to start answering the questions. Now we have our timekeepers, who I guess in some ways are probably the most important people here tonight, because if they fall asleep, then some of these candidates might go on for a very long time. So without further ado, I think that's probably all we need to say. Do make sure that your mobile phones are on silent, because it can be quite distracting for the poor candidates otherwise. So without further ado, I will open the St Brelade hustings for this evening.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I would just like to do a bit of housekeeping first. I'd like to say thanks to our Chair for stepping in at such short notice, Rose Colley. I'd like to thank the staff of St Brelade Parish Hall here for laying on the evening. And finally, thank you all to yourselves for being here. It's very, very well attended. Thank you very much. Okay, has it started?
Yes, so your 3 minutes will now
start. Oh, right, from when I start. Okay, thank you. The joys of being number 1. Right, okay. I'm going to start with a statement, actually. I have experience as a politician in the local government in the UK, and at the time of coming to the island, experienced some press that those that know me found humorous, but which has caused me annoyance and can be construed in a negative light. I welcome scrutiny from the media and the floor today, if the need should arise, to state the facts. Right, okay. So, what I'm standing for. So, what I'm looking to achieve in St Brelade in Jersey, well, let's start with empowering our community to help itself through addressing these 3 areas of health, particularly as we age, wealth through combating financial inequality, and well-being, keeping us happy, active, and socially connected. I have addressed all 3 areas through my community interest company, Tea Dance Club, hosting tea dances and line dance workshops across the island, but now specifically in St Brelade at Communicare, keeping us active, happy, and connected, especially as we age. I have danced with dementia patients. Many say they cannot dance, and as in one particular case, an ex-dance choreographer, when told she was a beautiful dancer, replied, "I didn't know I could." We've supported carers and the cared for as a place for entertainment and respite, and an opportunity to the wider community to catch up with past friends and acquaintances. At the height of the pandemic, we provided online connectivity with devices and workshops through our Tea Dance volunteers to the over 70s. This was enabled through a UK charity, Devices Online, and was all free of charge. I am passionate about my community interest business, and I want to empower others to do the same. Social enterprise should provide opportunities to people with skills, creativity, or just an idea to have a go, and in so doing, receive charitable funding and government support. It could be tackling financial inequality or financial crime, tackling dementia and addressing long-term care, or cycling, swimming and sport, the environment, or garden therapy. I have an exciting vision for St Brelade as a social enterprise hub and sandbox. This is tech talk for trying things out with minimal risk. We already have great facilities that we can build on in tackling the issues we are going to face with the ageing population. Silver surfers, reskilling for the over 50s, the super dupers, and those of us wanting to do and requiring to work in retirement. Build it here first in St Brelade, scale it across the island to export to the world. We already have the industry, let's now do it for health. Put us on the map as living longer, happier lives. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I've run out. Run out.
Who are you?
Oh, sorry, Carl Bush. Carl Bush, number one, Carl Bush.
Hello everyone, I'm James Corbett. I'm the Jersey Alliance candidate for St Brelade. I'm a lawyer, someone has to be. I specialise in international litigation, much of it in small islands with a big emphasis on financial services. Let me ask a basic question, because I'm not going to lecture you tonight in detail about what's in our manifesto. You can see that any time. There's a basic question, and it's what sort of Jersey do you want to be living in for the next 4 years and beyond? Straightforward question, not one that necessarily brings with it a simple answer. I want to give you my vision for what Jersey is and can be. It is and will be and continue to be, I very much hope, a vibrant, economically successful and fair community committed to preserving the best quality of life that its residents can enjoy. Simply said, but actively to be pursued. Now, to be truthful, I don't much like government. I would rather, for the most part, it simply got out of the way and let people get on with exercising their own imagination, initiative, ambition, and drive. And if you trust people to do that, and you give them transparency into what they can achieve, then for the most part, they rise to the occasion. I do not believe, and my party does not believe, in babying people. You have to carry your own load in this life. But government really does have one job in particular, and that is ensuring that there is genuine equality of opportunity. If people are going to rise to be the best they can be, they have to have a fair opportunity and shot at precisely that. And that government can do. I'm just going to talk about 4 things about which I'm passionate. I won't say anything in detail. You can ask questions about it. I'll answer as best I can. First and foremost, it's education. Without the best education to produce flexibility of mind and adaptability, we won't achieve anything. The children coming behind you, the grandchildren coming behind you, need that. And I'm not going to go through the rest, but they're housing, healthcare, and environment.
Thank you, James. Good evening, everybody. I'm Helen Miles, and I'm standing as an independent candidate for St Brelade. I've got strong links with St Brelade going back to the 1970s, where I was actually in the first intake of Monicole Primary School. I returned in 2000 to raise my family in the parish, and we all remain a proud part of our parish community. I spent over 30 years working for Jersey's public service, at Customs and Immigration, at the Probation Service, with the police, and latterly as a policy director. I'm currently the Vice Chair of Autism Jersey, and I hold some lecturing posts. I have a PhD in social sciences and I specialise in Jersey's unique honorary police and the parish hall inquiry system. Now, we live in a great parish and we live in a wonderful island, but in recent years we've lost focus on the issues that really matter to the public. I think we need to put Jersey back on track, and I can offer the commitment, the experience and the leadership that's needed. If I'm elected, my priority for St Brelade will be to establish a parish improvement project to ensure that we make the best use of our amenities. And that doesn't just include a Kenneveigh Parade and Precinct, but also the Elephant Park, St Aubyn's, the Railway Walk. I actually support the trial lease of an empty unit in the Kenneveigh Precinct to provide a hub for government and community services in the west of the island. It would be really great for people out west to go through a real front door and speak to real people about the real issues that matter to them. Island-wide, we've got to tackle the housing crisis if we're going to give our young people anything like a secure future. I support the delivery of all the things that we'll hear tonight: affordable housing, appropriate sites, reducing the number of empty properties and restricting external buy-to-lets. But I think we must prioritise first-time buyers by giving support for deposits and offering shared equity and deferred payment schemes to support affordable purchases. To control our population and support businesses to recruit staff, I think greater use should be made of the time-limited work permit system and make sure that those work permits are not linked to permanent residence. And we've got to be quite creative in developing suitable short-term accommodation initiatives, enabling families to let spare bedrooms without being taxed on that income. To improve education and skills, I think we should have greater specialism in our secondary schools, provide much more on-island training than we do, actually deliver a higher education strategy and ensure fairer support with living costs. As a former member of the Public Accounts Committee, I recognise the need for government to re-establish a culture of prudence and efficiency. And to restore your influence over the states, we must bring back senators at the next election.
Good evening. For those who don't know me, my name is Steve Bailey. I'm standing with the Progress Party. I've lived in Jersey for 25 years and in the heart of St Aubyn for 22 years with my partner Jenny. I came to Jersey to take up the post of Jersey Director with Condor Ferries and stayed there with them for 15 years. In 2013, I took on the role of the NatWest Island Games Director and delivered the biggest games to date on time and under budget. Since then, I have worked for the ports of Jersey and the Jersey Oyster Company in senior management roles, and I'm currently a trustee on the St Helier Youth Community Trust. I believe in party politics. I have always been a collaborative team player, and my professional life gives some examples of that. I firmly believe that a party made up of like-minded people can bring about change more efficiently than individuals fighting their own corners. We do live in a beautiful parish, and I will work hard to keep it so. The Kenneveigh Precinct needs attention, and I believe an upgrade to its building facilities, retail and commercial offerings could make it the living heart of our community. I will work hard to ensure that urban development is only undertaken in St Brelade when it benefits us as a community. On a broader note, I believe in fairness for all. More transparency and accountability from government, top down. We must ensure that our new government listens to the people, especially so when dealing with projects that have a direct impact on our daily lives. I would support the introduction of the living wage. This may have to be achieved in stages, but it is a pledge that my party makes. Education is a high priority for the coalition. There should be no barriers preventing an individual accessing high-quality education at any level or any age. We must prioritise the further development of the health service, ensuring it is fit for purpose and well-funded. Government must show respect for our teachers and hospital staff. They are a valuable asset, and their views must be listened to. I believe that government should always practice financial prudence and always look to achieve the best economic and social outcomes for the island. I am a keen supporter of the proposal to introduce a marine park. We must protect the sea areas that surround us, and the environmental flora and fauna must be protected from our fishing industry and the future generations that will follow us. I commend our full manifesto to you. It can be viewed at the Jersey Progress. I promise to help achieve the commitments stated on our manifesto and hope you will consider me for your vote on the 22nd.
Moz Scott, Mary Rose Scott. Thank you all for being here this evening. As a successful former local finance lawyer and business owner, I have highly relevant skills for government. I also have a desire to serve the common good. Love of the environment led me to campaign against insensitive coastal development as chairman of the St Brelade Bay Association. Knowing states members had been misled and confounded by technicalities, I stood in the last election as a newcomer to politics. Narrowly missing being elected as senator, I increased my voluntary work to serve as an independent member of the States Assembly's Public Accounts Committee and Government Statistics Watchdog. This taught me even more about failures in government processes and in political leadership. We are a small island that needs to right size and redirect our public spending. Government's growth is unsustainable, so is our use of the island's resources. Our receded economy is sluggish. Government's economic and self-management needs to change quickly to seize the new economic opportunities identified by the Economic Council and to fund and improve essential public services. Work on reducing tax anomalies and red tape needs to be urgently progressed. Meanwhile, the States Assembly has overcomplicated our electoral system while depriving you of votes. States members have paved the way for £1 billion I saw of a hospital to be funded by unprecedented public borrowing. A lifetime's experience has taught me the true meaning of productivity, evidence, good financial and people management, ethical conduct, transparency, and accountability. It's not enough for states members to say government systems, other people, or a lack of resourcing get in the way. The States Assembly has the power to change what is needed to improve political decision-making and resourcing. Former states members may not have worked hard enough to find out how. Some candidates may not know where to start. I already have made a start with work on the proposition list posted on how.je. I'm not here to play at politics while the island faces serious challenges. So this election offers you an opportunity to support meaningful and positive change and vote for me.
Good evening. I'm Steve Hallett. Many islanders are beginning to understand to their cost that the quality of healthcare they've come accustomed to has deteriorated in recent years and access to their GP is taking longer. I want better for you by helping to provide a health service that meets your needs, one that you can afford and access more easily. Whilst the cost of running GP practices has risen substantially, ministers and officers have misused our health insurance fund by using £58 million of your money on unconnected issues rather than supporting affordable GP appointments. The subsidy to GP practice has been frozen for over a decade at £20. It's unsustainable for GPs and putting off islanders like yourselves going for treatment. For a young family or pensioner, £50 plus is simply too much and set to rise further. Choose between going to the doctor or not? Cost should never be a bar to seeing your GP, so we will bring the subsidy back to at least the 2012 level by using the health insurance fund in the way it was intended. Failure to act will mean more and more islanders making the wrong choice, with the consequence that an illness or disease is not treated early, with often more intrusive and expensive intervention being required later, to the detriment of the patient. There is a crisis looming in GP practices through vacancies, retirements and closed patient lists. It needs attention now if primary care is not to collapse. Morale is low within the hospital. The staff are dedicated and they've got great pride in their work, but they're being let down by senior management who are uncommunicative and don't listen. Is this the way to treat a workforce that have supported us all through COVID? Staff that raise concerns are ignored or they're not taken seriously. Some of those I've spoken to live in a climate of fear. They feel victimised for speaking out. I've seen disciplinary procedures ignored by senior management as they minimise or dismiss concerns. It's dishonourable and it needs challenging. Unfortunately, it is challenged, but often at some cost to those that come forward. Can it be right that a senior clinician with over 20 years' service at the hospital has marched out of his office without due process or evidence of wrongdoing? Is suspension a neutral act if it destroys a person's reputation? Bullying and harassment must stop so that staff feel protected and valued. The debacle that was the closure of Samurai Ward Rehabilitation Unit highlighted how care was devolved into the community too quickly and at a significant cost to patients, both in human and financial terms. We currently have exceptionally high occupancy across the island's mental health wards, due in part to a lack of onward care in the community. When will senior management finally realise that the basis for the care model, care in the community, will not work and is failing islanders now? If you really want change, would you please consider me for one of your votes? Thank you.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Jonathan Renoff, standing as an independent candidate in St Brelade. A little bit about me first. I grew up in the parish. I went to Lamoille, Keneve and Holier schools, and then I went away for 30 years and had a career in television at the BBC, where I worked on Newsnight and made science documentaries with Ryan Cox and nature films with David Attenborough, climate change films and so on. And then I came back to Jersey 3 years ago, and some of you may have seen that I had a column in the paper, in the JP, and I've found after a little while that I was writing a lot of columns. I was complaining about things, and I thought, well, I can either go on writing these columns and being a bit miserable for the rest of my life, or I can try and do something about it. So here I am, and here's what I think. In this election, you're being asked to choose deputies that represent both the parish and can talk about island-wide issues. And I think in St Brelade we're actually quite lucky, because in a way those things come together in St Brelade, because St Brelade is in many ways a microcosm of the whole island. It has all the beauty and all the challenges. You know, we spend millions on consultants, but we can't find the funds to revamp the elephant park for our children. We build luxury high-rise apartments, but we drag our feet over protecting St Brelade's Bay. We can afford an £800 million hospital, but a quarter of the population are in poverty. I agree with what you have been telling me on the doorstep. Jersey has lost its way. I believe we need new, serious-minded deputies who will reconnect the State's Assembly with the people of Jersey to renew the ties that bind us. We need deputies who value accountability, transparency, and honesty. And we need some clear thinking. You know, on housing, develop brownfield sites, end mortgage tax relief on buy-to-let, devise an empty properties tax and expand the shared ownership scheme. On population, we have a problem at the moment with recruitment, and we need to solve that. But long term, we need to move to a sustainable, stable population. Not immediately, but in a 5 to 10 year transition. On the environment, we need to protect our amazing natural heritage and embrace the opportunities of moving to net zero. On the way we're governed, undo the changes made by Mr. Parker and give us back a simple system in which every minister has a chief officer who answers to. I believe there's a role for independent thinkers. We need to chart a middle course, above all a course rooted in common sense for the sake of the parish and for the island. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening in the corner there. I'm Monty Tadier. I'm one of your parish deputies already. I don't take anything for granted, and I don't presume that everybody will know me, even after 14 years. And indeed, I'm reminded that I was knocking doors today, this afternoon. I got invited in by a gentleman, and when we were talking, he said to me, "So where are you originally from?" And I said, "Dong Farm." And he said, "Oh, right, oh, yeah, I think I did know that." I think he thought I was maybe an import from the UK or somewhere else, maybe France with my name. It's the first time that I've actually given a Hustings speech down here at St Albans, because I think there's been a lot of talk about the loss of senators, quite rightly, and there's a lot of strong feeling about that. But we are now at least one united parish, which is something that I think is long overdue. And I'm looking forward with my candidate colleagues here to be able to talk to people in the whole of St Brelade's, not to be divided by this stream that's been running between us previously. You can't say a lot in 3 minutes. I want to focus on housing, health and heritage. Housing, we know there is a real crisis here, but we need people in the States who are actually willing to grasp the nettle. We do need solutions to that, and words aren't going to be sufficient. We need States members who haven't got vested interests when it comes to housing. We can't even bring in simple things like minimum standards and regulations, which means that people who are paying very high rents in Jersey, often for substandard accommodation, can at least have the knowledge that they're living somewhere safe and warm. We need new States members who take these issues seriously. I'm thinking about healthcare in particular, the affordability of seeing a GP, particularly for pensioners. 34% of pensioners in Jersey are living in relative low income. That's twice as many as in the UK, and that's not acceptable for what should be and what we're told is an affluent island. You'll forgive me if for the last minute of my opening remarks I do mention my running mate Nigel Jones. He has been, as you know, he's got COVID this evening. He took his test and he's staying at home, and we hope that he recovers very quickly. I saw something quite early on in Nigel. I've known him for some 10 years, and I've known Nikki Brown, who's been a youth worker in the parish, and I realised that he takes community values very seriously. He writes also a column in the JP with Jonathan, and he focuses on positive community values, also the environment, ecology, and it's that which I really saw, and that's why I asked Nigel to join part of our team as Reform Jersey. It's really important that we all work together as a team, whether we're party candidates or independents in the next assembly. And I always like to introduce Nigel to people as the young pensioner. He's 67, he's got a bionic hip, but in the first day of canvassing he did 24,000 steps, put me to shame. Please consider both of us for one of your votes.
Oh yeah, sure. Sorry.
The mic was stolen. So we now come to questions. There's one rule for the candidates, and that is that they have 1 minute to answer your question. There are more rules for you in that if you can make sure when you ask your question, it's a question that all the candidates can answer and not obviously something that is a particular gripe at one person or whatever. And the other rule is, it is obviously quite hot in here this evening, but we must try and keep as calm as we can and be nice in our questions, because obviously I know from 11 years ago when I stood for the senatorial elections, these hustings are absolutely terrifying as a candidate. So we do need to be as nice as we can to everyone. And I will, as I said earlier, First of all, we'll have a question from this side and then that side. So who would like to ask the first question? The lady right at the back?
Do you want a name as well?
Please.
Hi, I'm Leslie Branch. What I'd like to ask, because I heard most of you mention the words accountability and transparency. So if you were to be elected, how would you improve accountability and transparency of both the government and its departments?
Thank you. So we start with you, James.
First of all, by recognising we have the supreme responsibility to the people who elect us. If you forget that, you're not going to care very much about being accountable, and transparency won't come into it. A proper code of accountability on the part of all members of the Assembly is, it seems to me, essential. I'd like to think I have integrity. I'd like to think I have a sense of ethics. The fact that it's codified and I observe it and you know I'm observing it is a bonus. So far as transparency is concerned, yes, there are actions in government which are not open to obvious scrutiny, but there is a scrutiny panel which does its job to tear the hairs out of the back of the neck of every minister. That is the right way.
Thank you for the question. I think what I'd like to say is that in recent years we've seen a shift of power from ministers to civil servants, and I think that has to be reversed. And the first step to doing that is to return to a one minister, one department, one chief officer model, so that it's absolutely clear which elected representative is responsible for each department and who is actually responsible for each area of government policy. We can't have departments where you've got 3 responsible ministers or no responsible ministers, because it blurs accountability and that's not acceptable. Most civil servants understand their role. I certainly did when I was a civil servant. But some, especially some senior civil servants now, seem to think that the ministers work for them and not the other way round. So I think we need strong ministers with very clear policy objectives who lead the island, explain their actions to the public, and who just will not accept some of the undemocratic behaviour that we've seen over the last 3 years.
Yes, thanks for the question. I think actually when you come from a commercial background like myself, you were accountable not only to your fellow directors, you were also accountable to the shareholder. And there was nowhere to hide. If you made a mistake, it was a mistake. It was open, honest transaction. If we go back to the Charlie Parker situation, he actually closed down most of the to and fro between ministers and his government. He was effectively made himself in the position where everyone reported to him. He took the accountability away from ministers. They were unable to make clear, defined decisions with teams. As I said earlier, I'm collaborative and I'm a team player. That makes me a responsible person. It's in my ethic. And I do believe that we have to actually go back to the beginning, where ministers are responsible to the chief minister and the chief minister is responsible to them and everybody else.
Well, this is an area in which the States Assembly needs to get stuck in. And it helps to know the technicalities. So, you know, for example, Charlie Parker, 3 different ways in which he's supposedly described as accountable in the public finances law, and he still is proved to not to be accountable. So a bit of an amendment there. Contracts for senior civil servants. I don't know whether you saw that contract that was posted. It was really quite shabby. I mean, I'm a lawyer, so there you go. Outsource these contracts, these senior employment contracts to the independent sector who actually know what accountability is. Transparency, written reasons to be given by civil servants for their decisions. Really need that. That is actually a real key part of administrative law in the UK. And yes, we need that ombudsman. And we need those written reasons so the Ombudsman can actually have a good look at them. Freedom of information exemptions, too wide, need to be kind of reduced. We saw that with the minutes, CAM minutes. So basically, we need to get stuck in there too.
I felt some frustration there. I'll start with the transparency bit. We've got to start the next assembly in the way we intend to carry on with the election for Chief Minister. It's got to be transparent. We've got to know who's supporting who, no secret deals, so that everybody knows when they step into the assembly if a deal's been done. I know from our party's point of view, if we're going to do anything with any other party, we've got to make that clear to our members, and we'll be making it clear to the public. So there's got to be transparency at the start. The whole civil service structure, I'm sorry, is wrong. The idea that was brought in through P1 with Charlie Parker being the principal accounting officer has been a complete and utter disaster. He's undermined decisions on spending, thus undermining ministers. It's fractured the system, and I'm afraid when things get fractured, and things don't work, the void is filled up with civil servants and I'm afraid consultants. And we have been overwhelmed by an input of people from the UK to the tune of 100 and a cost of 50 million.
So Leslie, you asked about accountability and transparency, and I think on transparency what I would say is that this is a lot to do with tone, it's a lot to do with setting the right tone and having a language that involves talking to people, being open and having open communication that respects people, admits differences of opinion and doesn't hide between the language of press officers and so on. On a question of accountability, I think, I made television programs and we were given a budget and a schedule, and you created a team and you got the team to hit various landmarks and you delivered the product. And I think that what we need in government is those simple, basic rules. Who's responsible? When is the delivery? What are the landmarks along the way to that? And so that people can be held to those points.
This is quite a useful prop tonight because this is effectively like the buck that the Council of Ministers pass to each other from one minister to another. Is it the Transport Minister? Is it the Environment Minister? It's not my fault. You need to go and speak to the other department. P1, definitely, P1 2018, as it's known amongst politicians, was the big error. It was the error which I voted against in my party. We were a minority of states members saying, what are you doing? You're giving more power to the civil servants, giving more power to the chief officer in particular, taking power away from ministers and in particular away from the Assembly. So we need to reverse the worst of that. Now Charlie Parker's gone, but it's not about the individual. Remember, it was politicians who brought this man over, and he can't be blamed entirely. No doubt those who brought him over will be re-elected, but in other districts, you don't have a say in those elections. But you can have control over who you vote for in this election. We've got a personal responsibility with clear manifesto pledges. So make sure you vote for people who can deliver what they have in their manifestos. But also, I think, whoever we are, we've got to make sure that we have surgeries. I've had drop-in surgeries in the constituency for many years now, and that's how you remain true and accountable to the public you serve.
So, next question from this side. Oh, sorry, apologies.
Last but by no means least, Cole Bush. Accountability and transparency. I'd like to pick up on, I hope you can hear me, I'd like to pick up on what Jonathan mentioned was tone. I'd like to elaborate a bit more on that. And it has to be tone from the top. Strong governance, which is documented, strong policies that everyone can identify with, clear infrastructure. All this permeates through to the politicians, to the officers, to the staff. Everyone knows where they stand. And then at the end of the day, it permeates through to you, the customer, the electorate. Otherwise, as in the past, disillusionment has crept in. So this is what we need to make clear all the way from the top, all the way down, and it ends with contentment in the voters.
So definitely time now for the next question. I've got that right. So, question from this side. Oh dear. Gentleman there at the door.
Would you be in favour of making the minimum tax levels for all of these high wealth people up to 10% as a minimum? And would you also remove the capping on long-term care and social security payments?
Okay, I think there's sort of three questions there, so I'll address the first one. I was quite hoping somebody would ask me about tax, because as a married woman, I'm extremely unhappy about the tax system. So the simple question would be ask my husband. But as he's not here, I will answer. When you talk about the 11Ks in particular, or the high net worth residents, I think we have to realise that they bring quite a lot of benefit into Jersey in terms of philanthropy and good work. And I can speak from experience there from my work at Autism Jersey. What I would say, though, is that the minimum amount that they have to pay for a property is still levelled at 2 million, and I think that is too low. So I think that should be up to at least 3 or 4 million. I think the level they should start paying individual tax should go up from 145 to probably about 250,000. And then I don't think it should be 10% of their worldwide income, but I do think that it should be maybe increased from the 1% that it is. In terms of saved by the bell there, I think.
Thanks, Helen. Yes, I think Helen's basically answered what I was going to say. There is no doubt about it that high net worth individuals do bring benefit to us. We must also understand that any review or change to the current levels of tax that we may impose on them, we have to remember that they too are mobile. So we have to treat them in many ways as an asset that is good for the island. We don't want to chase them away because they can move. I do think that we have to carry out a review on the levels, and certainly the entry levels coming in, and that includes the value of house that they buy. It also includes the level of tax they would pay. I wouldn't want to put a figure on that at the moment, but I do think the whole thing has to be reviewed. But I do honestly feel that we have to look at them as a value to the island because they are very philanthropic.
To be honest, the whole tax system needs to be reviewed. We were talking about 010, we're talking about the new entrants for wealthy immigrants. I mean, you need to, for the reasons just given, you can't exactly retrospectively back out of deals, particularly as you may well lose some income, which currently, because of the state of our economy, because of the way that we manage public finance, we need as much as we can. And social security, removing the cap, similar sort of thing, that yes, it needs to be looked at, and perhaps there are areas in which you could actually say, yes, these sort of people should pay more, but just to say, whoops, let's take the cap off, you've got to really look at how that affects people.
Thank you. There does need to be a review of the high net worth 2-1E system. Helen's right. I think the property, where the property criteria I think is set too low. I think we need to review at how much tax they pay. There are cheaper jurisdictions than us, so I think we do need to review whether we're going to cut ourselves out of the market. Now, some may say good riddance, but if we do that, there's £25 million to £30 million of tax to replace. So I think we've got to be really cautious about the approach we take. I want to look at the long-term care, because I met somebody the other day, and he put me right on a few issues with long-term care. I thought it covered your care when you were at home with care in the community. It's clearly not doing that. You get about £4,000 worth of benefit a month for being at home. This gentleman had his mother at home with the care she needed. It was costing him £11,000 a month. Now, that means she's going to lose her home, and the whole idea was that we weren't going to do that. So we've either got to think about raising the percentage or having another review of that.
So thanks very much for your question. I think the interesting thing here is that we really don't know much about the benefits or otherwise of the high net worths in the island. We have not properly examined the cost-benefit analysis. I have no doubt that there are very many good, well, I say good, that's the wrong phrase, people who contribute a lot to the island who are high net worths. But I'm also aware of very expensive houses that are completely empty for almost, if not the entire year. And I think we have to be a little bit more savvy about this. We need to put tougher conditions on and make it clear that we actually do expect something back, and we are not leaving it up to goodwill and hoping for the best. So I think we just need to be a little bit tougher about this and really understand costs and benefits, and then set the conditions and the tax levels appropriate to that.
So we're not all here to agree with each other. I think it's a very good question. And I noticed somebody said we don't want to chase the super wealthy away, but we do seem content to be chasing our young people away who can't afford to live in the island, pensioners away who get to 65 and realise that their state pension isn't sufficient to live on in the island. At the same time, we have these platitudes that are trotted out that they're very philanthropic and they do great work, and no doubt many of them do. But we don't know that as a fact. There's been no cost-benefit analysis done. We know that there are also very many downsides to having super rich people in the island, including income inequality, which arises out of that. I object to the term high net worth individuals, in fact, because the real high net worth individuals in our community are the doctors, the nurses, those who've served us at the co-op at the Icelands throughout the pandemic at Waitrose, putting themselves at risk, often for low pay, not being able to afford to buy houses and not being able to afford the rents. The 1% tweak is not going to work because the 1% isn't even paid. Tax them the same as everyone else. If they want to skip the housing queue, that's another matter, but they should pay according to their ability.
Yes, there's no doubt that 11Ks, 21Es contribute tremendously to philanthropy. However, I'm sure we all know that in being here, it drives up the value of property and puts tremendous pressure on lower age groups that have the skills that can support the community. And this has been brought home just recently in two presentations that I've seen, one from the primary care GPs, the pressure on doctors, and also just the other day, the construction industry, the pressure on skills in the economy. It all adds pressure to this at the end of the day. So it's got to be a very, very careful balance, and I think we've got to address that as a matter of urgency.
I hope this time I won't be walking off the stage to the sound of my own footsteps. I am not particularly sentimental about high net worth individuals, if Monty doesn't mind if I use that phrase. Some of them do contribute very substantially to philanthropy on the island, and others don't. I don't particularly care if yet another football club owner wants to come and live in Jersey, but I don't see why they should have special privileges to do so. Currently, it costs about $145,000 cash down to come and live here if you're one of them. There is no good reason why my party is committed to increasing that to $250,000. Likewise, as to the value of property, $2 million in an international competition to attract these people is pretty small bananas. It'll cost you a lot more to go to many other islands to do it. Well, fine, let's jack up the price. If they're that valuable and they care that much, they'll come. And if they don't, well, goodbye.
So, next question. Lady in the green dress.
Thank you. My name's Sharon Cox. Now, what I have grave concerns about, and looking around here, I'm sure most people will, there's no one in the States, there's no minister for old age pensioners. We've heard a lot about the hospital, we've heard a lot about long-term care, and we've heard a lot about care in the community. And what Monty said earlier about the poverty of people in this island who can't afford to go to doctors, I think instead of, well not instead of, but as well as putting children first, it's about time we put our pensioners first.
And
Well, this is it. Who's prepared to say we do need someone who is a minister for pensioners, to look after the pensioners in this island?
Well, seeing that I'm a pensioner myself, would be 68 this year, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, if I can, I'd like to turn it on its head. I think that a responsible government actually doesn't sort of slice the cake so that we have young, middle and older people. I think what we have to do is take responsibility for all the different needs of the different age groups. And clearly, ageism is now a problem. I'm part of that problem, if you like. I'm the baby boomer, and I can see a lot more of us here. With age comes other problems, though. With age, we get dementia, or some people will get dementia. Some people become less mobile. So the problems actually increase as you get older. And quite clearly, that's tied into a health system, which should be tied into a health system, where somebody does take responsibility for it. And so what I'm saying to you is, in a new government, I would say, yes, put someone in charge of that.
Hi Sharon. I've got a bit of a different take on that because I think all the ministers should be looking after pensioners. I have a bit of a concern that the more you keep, as you say, slicing the cake or fracturing things, that in a sense you're not really getting down to the real fundamental issues. If you look at the statistics, your old age pensioner in Jersey actually is kind of more impoverished, than in the UK. And you've got to look at the reason for that. And again, you might call me obsessive. I just keep thinking economy, public spending. That money has got to go towards these people in a better way. Not to the kind of like senior civil servants who you kind of wave goodbye to and give a fat paycheck. So every single minister has got a responsibility to actually ensure they actually spend well and actually to the right people and actually support the economy.
Sharon, you bring up a really interesting point. We are proposing a communities minister, and I think that community minister would take the views of pensioners within, I think, under their wing. There are other vulnerable groups as well that I think the communities minister needs to also, I think, have a responsibility for, and groups that need a voice. The disabled is another group that don't really have a voice at the current time, and they need a minister that's specifically going to look after them. We're desperately in need of a dementia strategy, and again, that's something I can see a communities minister bringing forward. And one group that's always missed, and we've got to get legislation in place for them, the carers, because all of us in some part of our life have to care for somebody, and there's no legislation for that to look after those. So they're areas I think that a communities minister should be involved with and in charge of.
So it's very easy to make promises at Hustings, I guess, isn't it? I'm unconvinced, Sharon, that the solution is to have a special minister just for old age pensioners, but I completely recognise the scale of the problem. And what I would say is that, as in common with many other problems, we have a failure to integrate solutions. We have a failure to bring together things, in this case, to do with health, to do with long-term care, to do with dementia, to do with the social security system. Over and over again, we have strategies which look good on paper, but aren't carried through. So whether it's a minister for specifically for that, an assistant minister, or whether it's a group of ministers that you task with doing this, I would keep an open mind on that. But in terms of prioritising that work, that collective work to deliver a strategy, yes, that's absolutely what we need to do.
Specifically, whether we need a minister, I'm not 100% sure of, but I think there's definitely a role for a champion for the elderly in the Assembly. In fact, we need more. I think most of us need to be champions for the elderly. I was minded to think of former Senator Ferguson, who's still, in fact, she's still a senator, and I think we need to pay tribute to what she's done in the Assembly, because she made herself a voice for the vulnerable and a voice for the elderly in our community in the Assembly. And it's important that we have somebody there. And I know that's something, for example, which is very close to mine and to Nigel's heart, Nigel Jones as well. Now, I was talking to somebody in Kennebay Drive. He's very ill. He's in his late 80s. His son doesn't live here and can only come over a few days. And he would have relied in the past on phoning up the parish hall, for example, and getting lifts. And I know that that's something which we can look to be getting back, a proper designated phone line, so that people who do feel isolation, whether they're old or not, it doesn't really matter, that I think the parishes can play a good role in that as well. So very much, Sharon, I agree with the sentiment.
What's that? Do you want to? Yes, well, this is a massive part of my manifesto. I've been very, very interested in longevity, studied it in depth for the last 8 years. Now, what grates with me is when you say ageing. We're in the ageing population. Now, a lot of us, when we get to 50 and beyond, I'll rephrase that. Some of us will have to work. Now, I am absolutely for a communities minister. A bulk of the population over 50, and I'm looking at myself at 55 plus, 5 years in front of that and 5 years ahead of that, between 50 and 60. We're a bulge in the population. We're a product of the 60s baby boom. And my age group, we're all going to go through together 60, 70, 80, 90, maybe 100. And that is of paramount importance, and we need a communities minister.
Like Steve Bailey, I too am a pensioner and I have an interest in this question. I'm 70, a youthful 70, but there's no denying it. And that gives you a different perspective as you age as to what the problems are and the bits wear out and so on and so forth. But I'm also a father and grandfather. And that is absolutely bound to shape how I view the questions that have been raised. I would give my right arm and a few fingers on my left arm for my children and grandchildren. And that then affects how you look at what is right and proper between generations. To answer your question, Sharon, I don't believe there should be a minister or assistant minister for the elderly alone. I do believe that there should be a minister with responsibility for intergenerational affairs. We haven't worked out, I don't mean me, I mean all of us, what the issues are as yet.
Thank you for the question, Sharon. It's always a benefit when you go last because you get to hear what everybody else said. But one thing I would say, and just because somebody is a pensioner doesn't mean that they're vulnerable. Age is just a number, and actually what the government should be doing is looking after everybody who is vulnerable. And I firmly believe that we should be helping everybody who's vulnerable to live as independently as they possibly can for as long as they can. So in terms of the elderly, I would like to see the long-term care limits kept up to date with the cost of living rises. I'm not sure that we need a specific minister for old people to do that, but I would support the idea of having a communities minister to have a focus on everybody who is vulnerable and everybody that needs the support of government to lead a full and inclusive life.
Okay, anyone from this side? The lady in the red top.
Where do you all stand regarding the future of the hospital?
If I'm elected, I won't be able to say certain things like that decision was pants. I really would be agitating for a review of that decision, but at the same time, I am aware that because of past neglect of the hospital's maintenance, because actually of failures in hospital management, the hospital is where it is, and we need to stop protracting the decision. We need to actually get this thing built. So my objective is to actually agitate to get that decision reviewed very quickly, and to focus on a modular system. So perhaps so that you've got different buildings in different areas. That's easier to maintain. Perhaps even focus on that waterfront site that hasn't yet been developed, because actually open land does you make it cheaper. But then there's Warwick Farm. But we need to actually review that decision and actually, at least have two-site hospital. And we need to support improve hospital management fast.
Thank you for the question. It's no secret I didn't support Overdale as a site, and I didn't support the highway up to it, and I have not been keen on spending that sort of money on a hospital. But we've now got planning permission for the hospital at Overdale. Any further delay is only going to add even more cost to what we've already spent on that site. So I've come to the conclusion that we've got to move on with it, and we've got to build it as quickly as we can. The only thing I would do with the new council of ministers or the next government is to look at the funding, look at what we're going to spend on the hospital, review what we're going to put in the hospital before we go ahead and actually put a spade in the ground. That shouldn't take long. A review of the costings is something I think can be done relatively quickly. But if we go to another site, we're going to spend another 18 months, 2 years, all in the process of consultation. Costs are going to go up. And I'm afraid you, the public, I don't think are going to accept that. So we need to move on. I wasn't in favour of it, but we've got to move on.
Like Steve, I'm on the record as having opposed the Overdale application. I wrote an objection to the application and to the planning inquiry. But also, like Steve, I have come to the view that we now have gone through a process. We have to have some respect for process, and that it should now go ahead, and that our focus should shift to the costs of the hospital and keeping those under control, and the Jersey care model and how it's going to operate, and the problems that we have currently at the hospital. I will give one caveat to that, which is that if I was elected and we came into the States Assembly and found that there were surprises in store for us, that it wasn't going to cost 800 million, that it was going to cost a lot more, or that there were geological problems or something like that, then I think we would have to take a new view. But I think on the basis of where we are now, we should get on with it.
My personal view and the party view as well is that it's not the optimal site. It probably shouldn't have been built there or ever thought about going on top of that hill. But I think we have to look into the future. My concern with yet another review is that we'll find ourselves here in 4 years' time with still no hospital, and that has to be paramount to make sure we have a hospital which is fit for purpose with the staff. And we've got recruiting issues. Those are the areas that we need to be focusing on. If I may go back one step, this is a personal view now. I think what we've seen is that for too long, successive governments have been putting profit before people, and they've been putting greed before need. They pander to, I think, the super wealthy. And we've seen that as an example. I think the hospital should have gone down at the waterfront 10 years ago. It's flat, and you hear people saying a flooding risk, so it's okay to flood offices, is it? But not a hospital. That was the prime site for it. We've got offices which are now going to be vacant because people are working from home. And that's public land which is being given over to the private sector and sold off. Let's not let that happen again.
Sorry.
Yes, okay, well, I'm going to put my neck on the block here a bit. I believe that hospitals should be out of town. Whether or not this is the ideal site, that's the question. The decision has been made, and we need to crack on with this. The one reservation that I do have is that with the development in technology, and especially medical advancement and technology, where are we going to be in 10 years? Do we need a building of that size? I would like to think that it is actually in the right location, but I'm cautious to the fact that technology will be in a completely different situation technology-wise with the advancements of modern medicine.
My concern about the discussions over the hospital as they continue is they're ceasing to be about the hospital. It's a proxy for other questions which are raised. Now, let me get to the point. I don't think I would have supported this site or this concept 10 years ago. If I had a TARDIS, I'd go back and try and change it if I could. But I haven't got a TARDIS. The point's been reached, and this is the approach of my party, that you've just got to grin and bear it. Either you care about having a hospital with the highest standards, or you don't, in the end, and this is the only game in town. I'm sorry for this slightly playful language. It's not meant to be flippant. It's a matter of practicality. That's it.
Thank you. I think my position is rather the same as Jonathan's. If planning permission had not been granted, I would have been in favour of the two-site option, but planning permission has been granted, and I think it's incumbent on the next Assembly to carefully control costs, not only around the actual spend, but also around the project management, and to closely liaise with the public to ensure that they are getting the services that they need up there. I certainly wouldn't support the debate opening again about a new site.
I think Steve has actually answered the question on behalf of the Progress Party. Now, if I had been in the States, I couldn't have supported it. I think it's the wrong place. I think the cost is out of kilter with what we really require. And I think Steve and the others have actually given good answers. I think we have to review it now to ensure that we don't go and spend more money. And I took the point that Jonathan made. If there are hidden things there, it seemed unseemly that the planning permission was given so close to the election and it didn't pass. And I, for one, a normal person, I'm not elected, thought that that was not the right thing to do. It shouldn't have been passed then. It should have been handed over to the next government to make that decision.
So, this side, gentleman there in the blue shirt.
Caritas run the living wage campaign in Ireland. This is a key component in addressing the cost of living crisis over the next 4 years. Some of your manifestos already address this, and I know Steve Bailey, you've mentioned it already, but will you all commit tonight to move the minimum wage to the same level as the living wage in an incremental manner by the end of the lifetime of the next Assembly?
The simple answer to that, and I know we've discussed this quite recently, and you know my answer is going to be yes. I'm glad you've mentioned incrementally, because I think there are the vast majority of employers that already pay a living wage, but there are sectors of the economy such as hospitality, agriculture, retail that clearly that don't to some degree. The one I'll pick on, because it's always the one that's picked on, is agriculture. I think we do need to help them through up to a living wage. I think we need to have a look at with agriculture about the offset in terms of accommodation, because I don't think that's realistic at the current time. And I think that might help them through towards reaching a living wage. But we've got to look at the cost of living at the current time. and the shortage of labour we've got here at the current time, if we don't put wages up, we are not going to attract staff into some of these sectors. Accommodation is another issue in itself, but we're facing major problems attracting people here, and the only way to do that is frankly, is going to be to pay more.
In my manifesto, I've committed to exactly that policy. So the short answer is yes. I would just say that, you know, we are a deeply divided island, deeply divided. And I do think that raising the minimum wage to the living wage is a small part of what we can do to express some solidarity and some meaningful change for people who we depend on a lot to keep the economy going. And COVID taught us how important those low wage jobs are. And I think it's part of the new renewal of our society, really, that we need to bring people together by making sure that everybody feels included. So I think a staged moving up to the living wage is the least that we can do.
Thank you for the question. It's pledge number 1 in the Reform Jersey Manifesto, which we've all collectively worked on, so the short answer is yes. Specifically, we will raise the minimum wage to £10 this year. That will be the first proposition that is lodged, whoever any of our members are that get elected. But we recognise that it needs to be done incrementally so that there isn't a shock to employers, and we aim to do that by the end of this term. Interestingly, this is a lot of the pledges which we have here are to do with the cost of living, and this is actually something that saves money to the taxpayer, because there's something called supplementation. When people are actually paid below what it costs them to live in the island, they have to receive income support often. There's another perversity that people on very low wages often fall below the social security minimum earnings threshold. That means that they pay social security, but they don't get any of the benefits of it, no pension, and if they fall sick, they also can't claim. So we need to get people paying enough that they can live in an increasingly expensive island, stand on their own 2 feet. That's got to be a good policy across the board, I think.
Yes, minimum wage to living wage. We're in a cost of living crisis, which is felt first and foremost in the working population. The pressure on skills, I've mentioned this already. We need to attract people in the skills market to, first of all, stay here on the island and attract new blood with skills, and this is a step in the right direction. House price inflation raging away at 8%. No chance for younger generations to, more or less no chance in getting on the property ladder. This is all a step in the right direction, and it helps with financial inequality. So yes to the living wage.
I said I believed in fairness and a fairer Jersey. One of the hallmarks of that is that nobody's wages should be driven down to the minimum to get by on when that is below what any reasonable living wage could be. You have my personal commitment. There is one other point. The devil's in the detail. I want to be sure, when we speak about doing this in stages, that it doesn't drive smaller businesses to bankruptcy in order to do it. That way, we are throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Who's going to pay the wages if the businesses are done? I am sure that we can work that out.
Thank you for the question, and thank you to Caritas for the work that you do that focuses the employers' minds on the living wage. The minimum wage in Jersey is in law. It's currently £9.22, just going up to 10. I believe the living wage is £11.27 per hour. There's not a great deal of difference in that, really, and we are a wealthy island. with what everybody said. You know, nobody should be living in Jersey on a poverty wage. And I, for myself, would be happy to pledge my commitment to a living wage across the board.
In short, I agree. We have to support it. It's totally wrong that people are being paid the levels of salary that they are. They cannot survive. And let's be honest, there are industries in this island that have paid those salaries for far too long, and the majority of those people are visitors to the island, some on a permit to come and work here. Brexit has taken the majority of that workforce away. They're not coming back. Why would they? Why would anyone from the UK come to Jersey on a salary, even if we raise it in one go to 11.27? Why would they come here? They would be much better off going to Newquay, Padstow, wherever it is in the UK, to ply their trade in accommodation sector. It's totally wrong. We will have to carry the consequences of it, even if prices go up, and businesses will have to look and become more efficient. I really feel very strongly about this. I've worked in an industry with those levels of wages, and I really think it's got to change.
Yes, there is that commitment in my manifesto to do this, and I've looked at it in two ways. One, from the perspective of the employees who now are having to face massive economic transition, hyperinflation, that's all coming. But also, in terms of what's happening in terms of businesses here already and the fight for immigrants, for more staff. And you have to ask yourself, why wouldn't you pay the living wage? And I could think of a couple of reasons, and that is that some businesses aren't real businesses. No, exactly, the cost centres. So you actually, farming establishments, you might well say, if they're really subsidised, is that a real business? If you've actually got heavily subsidised businesses, you've got to ask yourself, well, do we really want you to operate that way? So I do have certain exemptions where you've got your farm workers being in kind brought over and accommodation given, that sort of thing. But generally, the principle's yes.
So, next question from this side. Gentleman there in the check shirt. Yes, you.
This has been touched on already in some extent. I wonder if you put some meat on the bone. The ministers, Council of Ministers, has dominated the last assembly to such an extent that 2/3 of the elected members have been marginalised. No voice, ignored, superb work with scrutiny, taken no notice of whatsoever. What are your suggestions for changing the system so that you, were you elected, would have a voice in the State Assembly rather than just being told what's going on?
Thank you. Yes, I think we have had a very strange situation for the last few years where we have had a Council of Ministers that has ploughed on with policies that have clearly been controversial or criticised on very good and valid grounds, and yet they've carried on regardless. And I think what we need to think about is a system whereby it's not so much a system, actually. I think it's partly about behaviour. You know, I think we need a government that is committed to listening, to understanding what people are saying and responding. There's a famous quote from Winston Churchill who said something like, you know, that when you hear criticism, it is a sign of a good thing because it's like when you have an illness and you get a symptom. It's a sign you should respond. It's a sign you should do something about it. I think a robust system of criticism where you are championing that system of criticism and listening is a very good thing, and I hope the Council of Ministers would behave more in that spirit than they have this time around.
Thank you. Do you mind if I call you Mr. Bullock? It's an old habit that's hard to break. So you will know that as a former Holian, one doesn't need to be in the majority to make one's voice heard very strongly. And I go much further than that. Even though we in Reform have only been 5 voices in a 49-member assembly, we've certainly punched above our weight. We've often got things through despite government opposition, and there's a whole list of this in my manifesto, just to name a couple. I mean, I managed to secure sustainable funding and increased funding for the arts, which had seen 10 years of cuts, and I didn't get support from any of my ministerial colleagues when I was an assistant minister, but I did it nonetheless by lobbying and with the support of my party. So it is possible, but it is difficult. It's ultimately a numbers game. Let's make this a little bit political. Let's have some fun tonight, because you do have a choice at this election. It is a numbers game. If you want to see more Reform members in the Assembly, please vote for them. No one's going to have an absolute majority. We're committed to working with independent, like-minded members. But if you want more of the same, they've rebranded themselves as the Alliance Party.
Sorry, Rick. Who's next?
I think this really touches on diversity. The same group of people collectively, time and time again, making the same mistakes. So if you look at diversity, if you look at a different cross-section to the Council of Ministers, then hopefully we'll break that habit of coming up with the same mistakes time and time again. So something has to change with the structure. That's absolutely true. It also touches on the transparency and accountability and the tone from the top that actually seeps through into contentment with the electorate at the end of the day.
I wondered how long it would be before Monty turned to his musical shtick about an alliance government. So let me be clear about this. What you described, sir, is the brutality of democracy. You're not going to get anything through the Assembly if you don't put together a majority to enable you to do so. Do I think that that means that whoever is on the Council of Ministers, the Illuminati, should be able to push through anything they want without consultation? No, of course I don't. I want to see an effective legislature in which the government is held to account. Now, that's where political parties come in. What you describe is a council of ministers that is able to pick off independence as it chooses. The advent of political parties makes the members not only accountable to the Assembly, but within the parties themselves.
Thank you for the question. I think it's quite clear that a lot of the behaviour that we've seen coming from government since 2018 has been undemocratic. If you look at, for example, the example that we had during lockdown and COVID, some of the decisions that were made, things like the technical advisory cell minutes were not released. It was very opaque around the decision making. And I think moving forward, the next Council of Ministers are going to have to be open and honest and acknowledge other people's opinions. And having sat on the Public Accounts Committee as an independent member, I see that sometimes there's a disrespect for the scrutiny function. And sometimes from ministers, there's actually a lack of understanding about what the scrutiny function is in the first place. And I think that needs to change for the next government.
Yes, I think that without doubt there were a lot of people in the House that were marginalised. It's been mentioned, I think, that occasionally there were decisions that were being made with no substantive figures that people were seeing. It was almost the perfect storm because we had the one Gov experiment with Charlie Parker taking all of the main information, not sharing it with ministers that had been appointed to carry out roles. So I think what I'm saying is that ministers have to be open to the people that they're working with. We shouldn't marginalise people in the States. We should be open and honest and accountable, as we've already mentioned. But I think it was almost like the perfect storm. One Gov experiment with Charlie Parker. We had the COVID going on. I think it was a very difficult period, but without doubt, and I'll sort of echo what Monty has said, if you want more of the same, you're going to get it with the Alliance Party.
Well, if the Council of Ministers carries a majority, it carries a majority, and you actually, the voters, help put them there. But I don't really necessarily believe you need to think of states members who are backbenchers as being marginalised. They still have the power to bring decent propositions, and if they are on target, and if they do get enough support, they will get passed. So I think part of the question is really, have you had the states members who have been hitting the right mark? I'll give an example. Mike Higgins, right at the end of the last term, brought some propositions to tackle non-disclosure agreements and civil servants misleading ministers. Those propositions didn't get through. Why? On technicalities. What I want to ask is, why did not one single states member looking at those propositions think, oh, that's a bit wrong, we need to amend that? Scrutiny needs better teeth. Scrutiny needs actually, after the Public Accounts Committee, actually needs to generate propositions that actually deliver results.
Thank you for the question. I'm a supporter of the ministerial system. We've got a former chief minister in the audience tonight. And when the ministerial system works well, it works extremely well. At the start of COVID, we managed to get a huge amount of legislation through with scrutiny support, and you could see how collaborative that was. As we moved through it, it became very disjointed. I'm very disappointed at the way people like the competent authorities ministers work. For example, a very small group of ministers almost working in secrecy, lack of information, lack of minutes, no understanding of decision making, and even worse was the poor communication. It was too much power in too few hands. And that's not good government, and that's not good democracy, and I don't want to see that happen again. I had personal experience of being shut out as an assistant minister for a great deal of time, and that's not how ministerial systems and departments should work. Scrutiny, I'm sorry, but there was a distinct lack of respect for scrutiny during that period. Thank you.
I think it's everyone with that question, isn't it? So, oh gosh. Guy in the front, you sir.
Population, sorry, people like the population seems to be a big issue in the island. We seem to have an issue with the population. Do you agree, and how are we going to solve it?
Thank you. We can't do this justice in 1 minute, so I'll either speak very fast or do a couple of points. The first thing is government has failed to get to grips with it over successive governments. I think we are in a very different position here, because whilst the population is quite high, generally people want it to be lower, there is still a skills gap, and all sectors, in fact, many sectors, including public sector, hospitality across the board, are finding it difficult to recruit. So these are things which require both a long-term solution in terms of vocational training. We need to put vocational training on par with academic learning to make sure that not all of our students are pushed necessarily down academic routes where it doesn't suit them. We need to have on-island provision. I personally would like to see a university in Jersey, and if not a full university, certainly certain faculties specialising in different areas. And that would have various benefits, including having a temporary student population who could also work in hospitality, for example. Lots of other ideas, but I'll leave it there.
This needs to go to that end.
Yes, I think we've got to be a little bit careful as to how deep we look into the population increase, because there is a little bit of a disparity from the previous census to the current census. And that states that the anticipated amount of immigration was actually down by over 4,000. So that may be partly due to COVID, but what I'm coming on to say is that we need to have up-to-date data. The problem with that figure is that apparently we're not entirely sure how many people left the island. Now, moving on from that, how do we reskill and how do we make the most of our current population? Well, I'm thinking about reskilling the over 50s. Many of us this age will have to work well into retirement.
Population does matter, but not for ugly, xenophobic reasons. As you will probably have picked up from my sinister accent, I'm an incomer, and I have been treated with nothing but kindness. Decently by decent people, less so by others. That's no different from anywhere else. But the number of incomers does feed the demand for property and services. And when supply and demand are out of kilter, you encounter a problem, and we are experiencing that problem now. The greater problem is the question of the dependency ratio and where that's going to leave us over the next 30 years. It has not been treated with sufficient seriousness in Jersey for at least half a century, and it needs to be.
Thank you for the question. Jersey needs economic migrants to support key services and sectors. There's no getting away from that. Migration is a feature of Jersey's history, and it will have to be a feature of our future. But there are things that we can do to ameliorate the situation. I don't think there always needs to be a link between work and long-term residence. I think we need to make greater use of time-limited work permits. Jersey can be an attractive place to come and spend a short time working. We already know that we're going to have a living wage. The pay is going to be quite competitive. And providing quality short-term accommodation for workers is going to be the real challenge, I think. I think we should be creating better pathways to develop our local young people into local industries at 14 and 18 and after graduation. There are some good examples in good practice, and I firmly believe that the civil service should be leading the way, providing opportunities for local people.
Just one point there Helen just made. I mentioned it earlier on. I think we kid ourselves if we actually think that people are going to come flooding down here to work for us. Those days have passed. People have real choice. The UK has an employment problem. It has plenty of jobs of its own, and people can work from home. So I don't think we're going to get them coming down. But what I'd like to see is real career paths, where we actually take youngsters from an early age, and we look and see their abilities and are they best based for vocational work, vocational courses. We need skilled people here, and it's not all skilled in computers. It's skilled people with trades. Why do we keep employing people from the UK for some of our top jobs? We do it without thinking, and yet we have people here who have the skills. If they haven't got the skills, then we've got something wrong, because we should be taking them and giving them a career path where they actually get trained.
I think the real problem in terms of the way in which immigration has gone up is the fact that productivity has carried on going down. So basically, people are earning less even though our population's growing. That's putting pressure on our resources, housing and that sort of thing. That's costing us more. Basically, the island isn't making as much money as it did, and that's not helping us support our own community. And part of that's a sign of just a change in the whole way that the economy is run globally. So we need to actually start thinking more about how we change our economy, how we train people locally, succession planning. And I do think that actually increasing the minimum wage to the living wage to stop some of that unfair competition that is going on, that leads to people saying, oh, we need more, and we need more, and we need more. No, we have to use what we have much better. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. If I'd have answered this 2 years ago, I'd have given you a completely different answer. I think we've got a big problem at the moment. I don't think it's we need to have a system that's going to stop people coming here. I think we need a system that's going to attract people to come here. That's the problem. If we're going to attract our own young people back to the island after they've been to university or travelling, or attract migrant workers back here, we're going to have to deal with the cost of accommodation and the cost of living. If we don't provide affordable homes, first-time buyer homes for people, young people that want to come back and start families, we're going to be in awful trouble over the next 4-5 years and onwards. And in terms of staff coming in, hospitality are being strangled. They've given us some solutions around what we can do around short-term accommodation for workers. We're going to have to start listening to them. We're going to have to provide some accommodation for them. And I don't mean boxes. I don't mean living in containers. Proper accommodation where they can have some quality of life.
Thanks very much. I think we do need to accept we have a short-term problem at the moment with attracting people into the island, and that needs to be tackled. But as I said in my opening statement, I think we need to, the key thing here is we need to plan. We need to have a strategy. We have had a 20-year failed strategy where we had a very high level of population growth, unplanned, we didn't build enough houses for it. It's been a real mess. It didn't lead to economic growth as it was supposed to, and it didn't solve the dependency ratio. So I think we need to focus on a long-term strategy which allows us to plan. And we know that 2,000 people leave Jersey every year. That's normal. That just happens. We can welcome 2,000 people to this island and still keep a stable population, a roughly stable population. I think we need to start thinking about that, because that way we can focus on the people we've got here, the skills we need to develop amongst people, the higher productivity economy that we could develop by not just always bringing in low-paid labour from outside, and we can build the houses we need for the people we know are here. So I think it's about planning.
That question's finished.
Yeah. Do you want your mic back?
Oh, sorry, wrong way.
Now, there's a lady in the second row who's been trying to ask her question all evening, so...
Thank you. My name's Marilyn Carey, and the question I would like to ask is, all the candidates have spoken about how beautiful the island is, how beautiful St Brelade is. What concerns me is the increase in vandalism and antisocial behaviour, and how do people feel this could be tackled in a productive sort of way?
Yes, well, thank you for the question. We have got to identify first and foremost the source of the vandalism. It's easy to say that it may be younger generations that are up to, probably at school age. But we've got to get data. We've got to know exactly who is doing this. And then we've got to address it head on. Community interest is a very, very big part of my mandate. Listening to both the receivers of the vandalism and trying to identify and connect with the people that are doing it. Now, my feeling is that it may be a bit of boredom, it may be a bit of frustration, but this is what we've got to connect to, and this is what we're going to find out.
Unlike any of my colleagues, I've actually been a judge. I've actually sat in criminal courts and I've sent people to prison. I hesitate to say it's been a pleasure on some occasions. It's actually pretty grim to do it. And every time I hear of vandalism, and I hear about it a lot, and antisocial behaviour, not just my reaction, but most people's is to say, lock them up. We'll soon knock this out of them. That isn't going to work. We just don't know why it's happening at the moment. Some are just tearaways. They'll grow out of it. Some won't. They're vandals. They love it. But the inability to differentiate between them and therefore to come up with a worthwhile solution to the problem is going to take more time than is spent on it, and I'm afraid it requires more than knee-jerk.
Thank you for the question. I think we need to realise that Jersey is one of the safest places in the world, and certainly in St Brelade, the vast majority of our young people are entirely respectful and entirely compliant. But one thing that concerns me, particularly over the last 4 or 5 years, is that we've taken our eye off the ball around community safety. And a lot of the early intervention initiatives that we had, such as the Prison Me No Way programme, such as the Building a Safer Society, have all stopped. So now children and young people don't have the benefit of understanding the consequences of their action and the impact that some of their antisocial behaviour can have on wider members of the community. And I think those programmes need to be reinstated immediately. We also need to remember that we've got a fabulous youth project in St Brelade. They do great work with our youth people, not just in the club at Communicare, but they're also out in the Winston Churchill Park. They will be out where the teenagers are. And I think we need to give them every support, particularly as the new skateboard park comes online. We know that we've got a youth worker dedicated to that.
Yeah, I agree totally with what Helen's just said. I think it's a very small proportion of people. We do live on a very safe island. It's one of the joys of living here. It's almost like we have, in a certain age group, we don't know what that age group is, but there's a disconnect. And I believe what we've got to do is a reconnect. There's so much to do here. We've all heard the saying, there's nothing to do in Jersey. And yet we went to the youth project the other evening, and it was like looking at a young community that were having fun together. And we talked to them about various things that they can do. But these people are already doing it. We have to do something about it, and perhaps that is for a period, putting some kind of patrol out there, if it's possible to do, and we can afford it. But I think we have to try and reconnect with the people that are doing it and say, you don't have to do that. You can go surfing down St Wands, you can do this, you can do that. There is so much to do here. And it is a small problem, but we do have to get on top of it.
Hi, Marilyn. This is something I have looked at in my role as chairman of the St Brelade's Bay Association. I chatted with the Children's Commissioner, Honorary Police, and I met been talking to the JYS about this too, because there's an element to which, yes, it's good for young people to have things to do. The JYS needs volunteers, so do the Honorary Police. So we all have a potential role to play there. The real thing, though, is what are the consequences. And at the moment in Jersey, we don't really have a real kind of system to have, certainly under 18s, face real consequences. But there's been a lot of work building on the Parish Hall inquiry system, and in fact, it's almost like it's being raved about, because this is the way forward to get community orders for kids imposed, and without them having a criminal record and actually having them, sort of like take consequences. And I'll support that work, if elected.
Helen's quite right. There are fantastic opportunities for young people in the parish and around the island, but there are some that don't want to do mainstream activities, want to hang around and cause trouble. Some of the problems I think we've had have been blamed on kids, and I'm not sure it is. I think it is an older group that are doing it, but nevertheless it needs to be addressed. I don't want to see young people criminised unnecessarily. I think there are consequences much further down the line that can follow you around for the rest of your life. But they do need to learn. The restorative justice has been mentioned. I mean, for some that'll work. I mean, meeting people they've offended, works for some. They understand what they've done. I recently spoke to the police chief about antisocial behaviour, and he believes a lot of it, certainly in St Helier, is centred on a hardcore of young people. Restoration won't work with them. Probation isn't working with them. And the courts do need adequate deterrence for that particular hardcore. But let's be honest, this is a small group of people, and we do need to address it in the correct way. And if we've got to go in hard, then we'll have to go in hard.
So I've spent a bit of time with the parish community police officer and with the youth service, and what impresses me actually is that there is a lot of work going on behind the scenes, and it's not always apparent. And when you read social media, there's a lot of knee-jerk reaction and so on. But you know, the police attend events, they video them, they have body cameras. They then go and pursue those people. They go to the schools to find out who they are, and the schools usually know who they are, and then they go to the parents, and then there's intervention going on. And it is one of the strengths of the Jersey system that we can do that we can bring multiple agencies together and deal with it in a sensitive and appropriate way, so that we don't just go for a knee-jerk reaction. So I think that it's slightly more positive than we think, but I do very firmly believe that we should tackle what some people might call small-scale incidents, because I think if you don't tackle them, it can lead on to worse things and set a bad standard for behaviour that will escalate later in people's lives.
This is a perennial issue, not just in St Brelade, but throughout the island. I think they tend to be isolated incidences. That doesn't mean that they're not important. What I would question is sometimes we jump to the conclusion that it's kids that are doing all of these things. Now, I'm sure that there are some instances, but when a bin is being pushed over, for example, outside a bus stop in Lekeneve, it's just as likely to be done by somebody coming back from the Horse and Hound at 11:15 or Miller's Bar than it is necessarily a young person who just likes to go out pushing bins over. Practically speaking, what I'm doing is, and what Nigel Jones has been doing, is we've already been meeting with the community stakeholders. Nigel's already met with John Cornwall from the youth centre. Tomorrow morning I'm meeting with a community police officer called John Chatford, who is the St Brelade allocated officer, and I want to understand more. I think it's really good to have someone like Nigel Jones standing with the experience from his partner Nikki Brown, because we need to understand what are the underlying issues, that if there are instances like this, are they isolated or are they recurring, and to deal with the recurring issues, I think.
So, in the last few minutes, I want one question from that side, one question from this side, and for the candidates to answer both questions in your minute. So, lady at the back, on that side, and anyone on this side, and gentleman in the red shirt at the front.
Hi. Let this go now. Yeah. Community, we've all come to elect somebody from St Brelade. I've been really lucky that I've lived in two northern parishes who had loads of community, and they celebrated events. As I've been in St Brelade for 22 years, there's little pockets of community everywhere, but on a big event, we've got nothing that we come together. Now we're having the 80th anniversary of the liberation coming up. Is there anything that you candidates could, well, I am voting for some of you. What are you going to do about the making community in St Brelade? I know we've got community as regards to the over 65s, but not all of the over 65s could attend these events. What I'm talking about is an overall community, young, old, coming together to celebrate events, not little pockets everywhere.
And your question, sir.
The Opera House is in need of a lot of renovation. What are you going to do about it?
So, candidates, you've got 1 minute to answer both questions.
Who is it? You, I think. Oh, is it me again?
Yes.
Sorry about that. Can I start with the Opera House? It is an island treasure. it is a great loss that it is not open for business. We lose the enrichment that it brings to life as long as that is the case. The financing is complicated. I believe the states must find it. We cannot leave it empty. So far as events to bring us together are concerned, I take your point about pockets of communities, but every community has a bunch of pockets. Every jacket has pockets when it comes to it, but it's still one jacket when it gets to the point. Off the top of my head, no, I'm not going to plan an event that is going to bring everybody from 0 to 100 together. It would be unrealistic. But you make a good point, and I am receptive to suggestions from those of you who are nearer to those individual communities and what can bring us together best.
Hi, thank you for the question. Community is very close to my heart, and I've been very disappointed actually this year that we didn't have more parish events, particularly around the Liberation and the Jubilee. One of the things, you know, I said, why isn't the village closed? Why haven't we got a street party? Why haven't we got a kids' party, a teddy bears picnic in the elephant park? One of the things that I've said in my manifesto is that I will set up, if I'm elected, a parish improvement project, which would actually engage parishioners of all ages, from the toddlers right through to our pensioners. I think we have got pockets going on. You know, we've got a lot of things going on at Communicare, but not everybody knows about them. They're not well publicised. And I think we need to have a community conversation, a parish conversation, and we need to reconnect the parish. And I don't just mean physically. We need to reconnect ourselves as parishioners. And I would be very keen on using a lot of the parish amenities that we already have to do that.
Yeah, the Opera House, of course, it's quite wrong that it's closed and not being used. We know it needs repair. It's not beyond the gift of government to sort that out, to be quite frankly with you. I'm lucky, I do attend a lot of events and a lot of shows, Chicago, Ghost, you name them, but we're having to travel farther. They're not in properly built places. The Opera House is a jewel, and we have to get it back, and government has to sort it out. With regards to the community, and you mentioned Liberation in particular, you should have been in the Rue de Croquet on Sunday, because believe me, it rocked and rolled. We had 200 people there, and we closed the street. We brought people together from outside of our own street. But it was a tremendous affair. And St Albans is well known for this type of event in past years. Food fair we had down here. There used to be some riotous parties down here that were organised through the parish. To run those events, you have to get volunteers. I'm sure there's people here that would volunteer to help in those situations.
So I think there's an element of personal kind of getting your personal time and inspiration in this, and so congratulations to those in Rue de Croquet and John Farm. They seem to have some really good parties. It's such a shame that during the pandemic we were going to have a really good party for the 75th anniversary of Liberation in Winston Churchill Park, and I very much hope that we can revive that and really have even a better one for the 80th, and I certainly would like to encourage the Bailiff's Office to go down that line. I have been advocating for a West of Ireland Hospitality Association, which I think can also help in terms of hosting proper events, and part of the reason is that some of the policies we're seeing are rather town-centric. The Opera House, yes, it needs to be supported, renovated. I haven't got into the ins and outs of what's going on there. We'll look into that. I do sometimes wonder why it's not used more for commercial events, because it seems such an amazing venue. So I would be supportive of keeping that going, but actually would like to look at creative ideas for that too.
Thanks. For the 80th anniversary of Liberation, we've got to bring the parish together. We haven't got two districts anymore. We've got one parish, so we've got to bring the parish together. We had Diamond Jubilee was at Regis Garden. I remember I ran it and got a lot of support from the deputies to do that. Hundreds attended that, and it was an absolutely incredible community event. But it's up to those that you elect as deputies to help. It's not should all fall on the constable to do this. It's for the constable and his deputies to put an event on. And in terms of funding for the Opera House, the funding's available, it's there. But what I want to see is, I don't want to see the same decay happen a second time round. I want to see a board or a committee put in charge of the Opera House that can run it commercially, so it can stand on its own 2 feet, and it doesn't have to come back to the States at some time in the future. But it's in desperate need of refurbishment.
I think the Opera House is a classic example of the bad management of states' facilities and investment strategies. There was a fiscal stimulus fund application for that was approved. It should have been done, and then they discovered that the work wasn't going to fit within that time frame. It's classic lack of joined-up thinking and proper planning, and we see that over and over again with Fort Regent and so on. This inability to plan ahead and to really understand what we're trying to achieve. So I think, of course, we know we need the Opera House. So yes, we should fund it. But can we please in future have a system where we monitor these things properly and have proper strategic plans? In terms of the parish, I think this election is an opportunity. You know, I think we may have some new deputies. We will have some new deputies, actually, for sure. And, you know, there's a chance to forge a team that works strong and creates a strong voice, working with the constable to really help and rejuvenate the community spirit in the parish.
Thank you. I welcome the question. It's probably a good time to set my stall out, is that if I do get re-elected and you're kind enough to trust me with that position, I will be seeking the position of Minister for Culture and the Community. I think those two go very well together. And it's something that I've been able to work on over the last 4 years. The 2 years that I spent as an assistant minister in government were a real eye-opener. I learned some very interesting things about how government sometimes works and more often how it doesn't work, and it doesn't represent the public interest. Specifically with the Opera House, and Sue, I'll come back to your question maybe later if we can talk privately, but my commitment is firmly there. The Opera House, there's 2 issues. I was successful in securing revenue funding for all of the arm's length arts and cultural organisations, but capital has always been a problem. There's this ludicrous scenario where the Heritage, for example, and the Opera House are required to put in bids for things that should be routine maintenance. You have a tenant-landlord relationship, the landlord being the states. You shouldn't have to bid for these things. They should just keep the properties maintained a long time in advance.
Community interest events. It's a big part of what I've done over the last 4 years. Tea Dance Club, community interest business that I've been running throughout a number of parishes and more recently in St Brelade up at Communicare. The big part of my manifesto is empowering community to help itself. So providing the structure for community to work as a social enterprise. As a social enterprise, you connect with government and governance. You also connect with funding. So that is through enabling tea dance events, maybe. But I don't want to end with just that because it stretches into many other aspects. Renovation for the Opera House, again, community interest, social enterprise. You will get funding, you will get government support if it's a social enterprise.
Well, I think we've now used virtually all our allotted time, so can I finally thank all of you for coming, and you all were very, very kind with your questions, so thank you. And thank you to all the candidates, and thank you again to our timekeepers over there who did perfectly. Thank you so much.
Rose for chairing again, and thank the Parish Hall for allowing us to use this facility. We do appreciate it. And there is going to be a Hustings on the 14th next week at the Canada School, so do tell people if you weren't able to come tonight on behalf of all the